Thank you, Annie, and thanks everyone for being here. I am pretty excited to present on this topic because as we develop the concept of Resiliency Village, we got such positive response everywhere we've talked about it that I'm pretty convinced that it's an idea whose time has come. And the idea of ending homelessness entirely in the community seems like a really big project, but I'm pretty sure that can be done too. And what I want to talk to you today about is the link between trauma, poverty, and ultimately homelessness. And just so that we all get on the same page, I hope I can make all this work. Let's see. What was that?
Sounded like banjo.
The machine is resistant.
You had this thing working.
Sound effects. There we go.
I can do it manually. Maybe there's someone who works here in tech can help me with this device. So just so that we get on the same page with what I'm talking about with trauma, not the kind of trauma that sends you to the hospital, or this could send you to the hospital. But I like these two definitions of the type of trauma that I'm talking about today. Trauma is when we encounter an out-of-control, frightening experience that has disconnected us from all sense of resourcefulness or safety or coping or love. And this is the kind of thing especially impactful when you're a child, because you're not in control. And so any resource that you have is taken away from you, any sense of safety. Oftentimes you feel unprotected by the people who are supposed to protect you. And in some cases, the people who are supposed to be protecting you might even be the ones who hurt you. So Tara Brach is a great author who coined that definition. And then trauma is the response to a deeply distressing or disturbing event that overwhelms an individual's ability to cope, causes feelings of helplessness, diminishes. Oh, we have a different one. Okay. Their sense of self, their ability to feel the full range of emotions and experiences. And this, I've been working for 15 years as a homeless and foster youth liaison. And every single day in my job, I deal with homeless kids and foster kids. And then I also deal with people who are not actually part of my job, but because for as long as Jamestown School has had a resource center, we've been allowed to serve the entire community. And on a weekly basis or a few times a week, I have people who just walk in off the street and ask me for things like tents, and ask me for, we run a small food bank and they need some food, they need these resources. And you can see that their sense of their self is so compromised by their experience of trauma, and they don't have that full range of emotion. It is so rare to see joy on the face of people who come in who are in this situation. It's so rare to see them actually smile about anything other than, I'm happy that I can get a meal right now, or if I happen to have a blanket or a coat that they need in that moment. But to actually experience just the joy that we're having of sitting in here with company and eating a meal, it's just a rare experience for these people. And you realize that as time goes on, if that's the way you're living, it's no wonder that you'll wind up homeless. So one of the best ways that we measure the impact of trauma is through the Adverse Childhood Experiences Assessment. And it was a few years ago I would have said that, and no one in this room would have known what I was talking about. But actually it was just last year, we had one of the authors of that study was right here in this room talking to us, Dr. Vincent Folletti, thanks to Dr. Bernstein who brought him up here. And I had the privilege of driving him here from the airport, so I got to spend a few hours with him, and it was an amazing experience. So what I'm going to do, some of you have been in trainings with me, probably a few more of you have seen this video, but I'm just going to show you a 5-minute video that really explains ACEs far better than I could do it, and then we're going to pick it up from there. And I'll see if I can make the technology work. Oh, well there, it worked one direction. There we go. And now, I'll just hit the play button here. I know about that part. I thought I did.
There we go. Yay.
What does your parents' divorce have to do with your risk for heart disease? If your mother had a drinking problem when you were growing up, are you more likely to suffer from depression as an adult? Here's what you should know about ACEs. ACEs stand for Adverse Childhood Experiences, extremely stressful events that can happen to a child growing up. Some experiences are so stressful that they can alter brain development, as well as the immune system, increasing the risk of lifelong health and social problems in adulthood. The term comes from the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, landmark research that shed new light on the root cause of everything from stroke and liver disease to substance abuse and mental illness. In the late 1990s, an epidemiologist from the Centers for Disease Control and a preventive medicine doctor at Kaiser Permanente set out to understand the association between childhood experience and lifelong health. They asked over 17,000 people in the Kaiser Health Plan in San Diego about their health history, as well as difficult questions about their experiences growing up. Tallied up 10 different kinds of adversity in this largely middle-class and college-educated population. They were stunned to see how common ACEs were. 21% of all respondents were sexually abused as children. 19% grew up with someone who suffered mental illness. 28% have been physically abused. And 2 out of 3 respondents had experienced at least one ACE. The researchers next looked at how someone's ACE score, or the number of adversities they experienced, related to a wide array of serious health and social problems. They saw that the more ACEs someone had, the greater their risk for poor outcomes compared with someone with no ACEs. Someone with an ACE score of 4 had twice the risk of heart disease and cancer. Someone with an ACE score of 5 had an 8 times greater chance of being an alcoholic. And those with an ACE score of 6 or more, on average, died 20 years earlier. With every major problem they looked at in the ACE study, the risk went up for each additional adverse experience in childhood. As Dr. Robert Anda says, what's predictable is preventable. It's important to remember that ACEs are not destiny. ACEs are a tool for understanding the health of a population as a whole. For individuals, an ACE score can be a tool for understanding their own risk for health and social problems, and empower them to make changes for themselves and their children. ACEs tend to get passed down from generation to generation and are common across all income levels, races, and cultures. But increasingly, people of all different professions and backgrounds are coming together to discuss how ACEs affect their communities. They're finding new ways to treat and prevent ACEs. Many doctors are starting to screen their patients for ACEs as part of their medical history. More schools are becoming trauma-informed, considering the source of problem behavior when disciplining their students, instead of immediately suspending or expelling them. To learn more about interrupting the cycle of adversity and improving health and well-being for the next generation, please visit kpjrfilms.co.
So we get an idea. I've messed this up too. Check 1, 2. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm going to jump back. So we get an idea of how important it is to address ACEs, and that's why I'm so glad that you're all here today. That's why I've been on this the Tuolumne Resiliency Coalition now, getting the new name down, for 15 years, because that's what we do. we address ACEs, we address childhood trauma, and we're working in this community to make sure that whatever's happening to these kids, once it's happened, we can't undo it, but can we build the capacity to have resiliency? Can we build it in them the capacity to rebound from things that are going to happen? We know these things are going to happen. And on the other end of it, what can we do to stop it from happening to the best of our ability? That's why we understand that we have to work together at this, and that's why when we have an event like this, we can say, yes, there are more than just this few people that meet once a month and do our thing, that care about this and want to make a difference. And so how does this finally wind up adding up in our community? How does it come to impact them? So what you just saw there, this is the original ACE thing, a childhood that has you have a bad experience in childhood, you have these social, emotional, and cognitive impairments, you have some bad behaviors as a result of them. We see that in school. Those are the kids that get in trouble or wind up out of school, a whole bunch of things like that. And then eventually that leads to disability, disease, social problems. You wind up incarcerated, you wind up not graduating from high school. All these things happen to you. And for the ones that have a whole bunch of ACEs, 6 or above, as was mentioned, you die early. You die 20 years before your peers do. And those years that you lived were not great ones. It's hard to be the person with a whole bunch of ACEs. It's hard to live that life. Now we've also added something to the pyramid. We're looking at the bottom down here. It matters where you're born and where you live. You can have an ACE just by being born in the wrong neighborhood, your zip code. If you live in some place where there's a lot of violence and a lot of trauma, a lot of substance abuse, you're born into an ACE. And there's a lot of people, and I'm one of them, who believes that living in poverty is an ACE just from the start, no matter how great your parents are, no matter how good you got through that poverty. Living like that is a really tough thing to do. It's hard on a person's life. Then we have these other social and other contexts where you might be, if our schools aren't trauma-informed, we might be injuring the kids even further. So we have to understand this, and that's why the pyramid now has like an underground section to it. Because this is so impactful that it leads to, ultimately, homelessness, ultimately this kind of poverty that has been, let's see, everyone here is from Tuolumne County or somewhere around here. Have you heard about that we maybe have a homeless issue in our community? Has that run across your radar, like 3 years of task force meeting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Yeah, we have an issue. The bottom line is, children who experience childhood trauma do not just get over it. This lasts. I'll tell you from working in school, they're the hardest ones to educate. They take more money. It's hard on teachers to work with them. They have the lower graduation rate. What's one of the leading indicators of being eventually adjudicated? Not graduating from high school. Raise your hand if you're in law enforcement and you've had to work with people who didn't graduate high school. Who do you get on the street? That's the #1 cause. PTSD and other mental health issues. This child right here, he's the one, maybe he doesn't act out in class, but I'm worried about him. I don't have to deal with him every day. He's not coming to the reflection room. He's not getting detention, but I'm really worried about that kid. Their immune system is compromised. That's why it showed in there. Did you fix a microphone for me? I'm yelling at it. Okay, great. I could do that all day long, though.
When your immune system is compromised, you get sick more often. What does that lead to? It leads to not being in school. It leads to all kinds of troubles. Early pregnancy. So one of the groups that we know is most traumatized are foster kids. I don't have to know the details of your life to know that if you're not living with your parents, if you're in foster care, you've been traumatized. Something's gone really wrong in your life. So let me just throw a few things out onto you about foster children. 65% of kids who age out of foster care will be either homeless, incarcerated, or dead within 18 months. 75% of our inmates in the California state prison system have spent time in foster care. 80% of federal inmates have spent time in foster care. Only half of foster kids graduate. Less than 3% of foster kids get college degrees. 70% of girls who age out of foster care will be pregnant within 2 years, thus continuing the cycle of poverty and trauma for the next generation. The data, people always tell us when we're working in these fields, we need to be data-driven. The data tells us that trauma impacts people for life, especially if we don't address it. Substance abuse. There is no greater indicator of future substance abuse than trauma as a child. Data tells us that if a woman is using hard street drugs, especially intravenously, there's a 90% probability that she has been sexually assaulted. That's what the data tells us. Crime, offender and victim. You are so much more likely to be a victim of crime if you have trauma in your past, and you are so much more likely to perpetrate crime if you have a trauma history. I have some numbers on the next one. And homelessness. We know that over half of the homeless population are former foster kids. But to me, the ultimate loss is this loss of human potential. There are no throwaway people. Hurt people hurt other people. Hurt people have really hard lives, and hurt people wind up living outdoors. Washington State did a study of foster youth. They have over 1,800 kids in this study. And so this goes to some of the larger factors besides being traumatized. It matters who you are. Race, African American youth are more than 1.8 times more likely to become homeless. Mention that pregnancy thing. If you're a parent, you're more than twice as likely to become homeless as a youth. If your family was recently homeless, you're more than twice as likely to wind up homeless. Poverty charges interest. And it's compound interest. And it keeps charging you interest over and over and over again. The best way to wind up homeless is to be born into a poor family. The best way to wind up on the street is to have some history of your family already having been there. If I don't have the money to fix my tooth because I got a cavity, pretty soon I have an abscess, pretty soon I have a tooth that has to be pulled out or just falls out, pretty soon I can't chew food. Poverty charges interest, and it keeps piling up. Your school placement, this is especially relevant for foster kids. If you frequently change schools, especially more than 4 times in 3 academic years, you're nearly twice as likely to become homeless. Trauma, poverty, charging interest. The number of foster care placements. If you're been moved around a lot, your risk for homeless goes up by 1.5 times. And the justice system involvement. Youth with multiple convictions, 4 or more, and youth who've been in juvenile rehab, 1.5 times more likely to become homeless. That's how you wind up out there. I recently went to a conference, a trauma conference in Los Angeles, and I stayed at a hotel that was about a half a mile away from the California Endowment. So I had to walk a half mile every day, which is great. I had to walk by homeless people every single morning on my way to the conference. And I started to think about, because Los Angeles is well known for its massive homeless population, and we talk about the crisis in Los Angeles. Homelessness doesn't look a whole lot better in Sonora. I took that picture in one of our camps. On my way every morning, I had to walk by City Hall, the police department, the federal building. This picture right here, this is actually the back side of City Hall in Los Angeles, the homeless help desk. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Not a whole lot of help for that homeless person sleeping there. And you notice the other person's just walking by because it's been normalized. In Sonora, this is what's normalized. This is how people are living right here, in our town, in our community, every single day. So when I was there, I got to thinking about this. Wow, do they have more homeless people, like as a group per capita in Los Angeles than we have here? Because I participated in the PIT count the last several years. And we find a lot of homeless folks in those 3 days. PIT means point in time count. We go out for 3 days, we ask, where did you sleep on a certain night? So we get a count for that night. And I thought about that, and I said, I'm going to go home and do some numbers. So I came home, and I looked up all of the biggest homeless populations in the country. Those are the top 7 homeless populations in the country. New York City has 78,000 plus. They have a population of 8 million. So they have 1% of the population is homeless. Los Angeles County has almost 50,000 homeless people, but there's 10 million living there. They have a half of 1%. You can see the numbers, they go down. Look at Tuolumne County at the bottom. Our PIT count, put into our population, we have the same rate of homelessness as San Francisco. If we use the summer PIT count, when we can find people a little better, we have a higher rate per capita of homelessness in Tuolumne County than they have in New York City, Los Angeles, San Francisco, any major urban area that people always talk about having a homeless crisis. It's worse here. Worse. Why does that matter? It impacts every single person in this room. It impacts everybody who lives here. This is a safety issue. It's not safe to live like that. It's not safe because it's unsanitary for one thing, and we know for sure it's life-threatening because in the last year we've had 2 people killed out on Highway 108 who live in that homeless camp. It's not safe. It's not safe for you, it's not safe for me. It's not safe to have people so desperate that they'll commit crimes. That's not safe. It impacts our schools. Like I told you, I've been the homeless youth liaison for 15 years in Jamestown District. Some years in Jamestown, we've had as high as 30% of our kids experience homelessness in the year. So that means if you have a classroom of 20 kids, you might have 6 kids in that room that have experienced homelessness in that year. Plus the ones who maybe did it last year, plus maybe a foster kid. Do you know how much harder it is on the teacher to do the job when that's who they got to work with every single day? You know how much harder it is on our resources? Do you know how much harder it is to just get that kid through the emotional roller coaster that they're on, much less teach them how to do their math? It's a big impact on our schools, on every school in this county, throughout the county. And because we're rural and they move around, it's really hard to transport them and get them to school, so they have lower attendance, they have lower graduation rates, they have higher suspension rates. I've been on the STAR board, School Attendance Review Board, for 15 years. Every single family that appears before us has a trauma history. I mean, every single one. And then when we ask them things like, are you getting services? Are you seeing a counselor? Time after time after time, the answer is no. They can't get there. They can't afford it. Or maybe once in a while we get a yes answer, and usually what that means is they went to an intake once, but they never went back. It impacts our schools to have people, our percentage, to be that high. And that percentage that I was talking about, that's the PID count. That's only the people living outdoors. That doesn't count the ones that are doubled up, the ones that are the hidden homeless. And there's way more of them than the ones that we counted. That's the impact of trauma and poverty and homelessness in our community. It's strong, it's powerful. It impacts our schools. Law enforcement, how much time do you guys spend dealing with the homeless guys? That's expensive. That costs you and me and everybody else in this room, and it means they're doing that instead of doing something else. Instead of helping Laura do what she does best. It doesn't have to be that way, and it shouldn't be that way. The business and the merchants. It's no fun to wake up, come to work and have some guy sleeping in your doorway. It's no fun to have people defecating on the sidewalk. It's not safe, it's not sanitary. It's not good for them, it's not good for us. It's not good for the town. Service providers. Let's say I'm a mental health provider and I happen to get somebody who actually comes in the midst of their depression, and I make an appointment and have them, I want them to come back and see me. But then they miss the appointment. And now that time is wasted. It costs us money to do this over and over and over again. Service providers pay a high price for people living like this. Hospitals, clinics, other medical providers. You know that in the University of Chicago Hospital in Chicago, they have actually taken to paying for housing as a medical solution to people who live on the street and have to use the services so often. They have a joke there that it's cheaper to put them up in a hotel on Lakeshore Drive, which is only $650 a night, because it's $1,200 a night to spend the night in the emergency room. Who visits the emergency rooms over and over and over again, and who doesn't get well? Homeless people who live outside. It costs us more money. It's hard to live outside. Your body doesn't heal. Your mind doesn't heal. You don't get better. You get worse. Something that you and I could go in there for, get a quick prescription for, or be told to take better care of ourselves in a certain way, and in a week it's done. You live out there, it just goes on and on and on, and gets worse and worse and worse, and gets compounded with your mental health issues. But again, to me, the lost potential, the lost human potential, is what's really the most costly thing. Now, I want to introduce you to a few of the folks who I've met out at Stockton County. These are just going to be like a quick 3 minutes to let you know that these are real people and they have a connection to our community. And I got a few people in here. This young man, Michael, He's what we call TAY, transitional aged youth. He's in his early 20s. You're going to meet a young mom who's talking about losing her kids, so you're already going to see the next generation of trauma, and then you're going to meet two slightly older guys.
I was born here, and I grew up in Washington. My brother was murdered in Washington.
Wow.
So we came out here to bury him, and this is where I want to be, by my brother. So like, there's no one out there really that will hire us. I mean, I tried. I do side jobs.
For you?
Yeah. I've been on my own since I was 13.
Since you were 15.
I left home because of family issues.
Was there a lot of like trauma or violence or anything in your house?
Physical and emotional abuse, and no one would listen. When I went to TPS, they just said I was lying, I was making the stories up.
Now about a year and a couple of months.
And how did you come to be without shelter?
I moved from Oregon back to here, and the people that I was living with moved to Nevada, and I had nowhere else to go except camping out right now. I left in order to get my Hep C clear because it got off drugs. I don't do no drugs, I don't do alcohol, I don't do none of that stuff. But I'm doing my best.
Right on.
But we do our best.
Right on.
I worked hard, and I got me a generator, no gas for it yet, but I do have a generator and a stove. A lot of my memory, I don't remember going to high school, I don't remember going to college, or just President State Bulldogs, crying out loud. I don't remember it. So I'm out here doing the best I can, hoping I can find that one person that can be just take me aside.
Before that, I broke my neck and my back. I was at a trucking accident coming out of Grants Pass, and I was living in Stockton. I collected women's comp, and taking care of my wife and my mom. And we both died at the same one. My mom died on top of me. My wife died right on top of me. And I was in jail. I was just in the coma. Good help. I'm using this tool. Walk with a card, $20,000 and we work with tools. I still wood with them.
Real people with real stories. Real people who are all had a connection to Sonora and to this area. They didn't come here because of the great services. It's kind of a myth. Oh, people come to the hills because it's easy to live here. It's not easy to live anywhere outdoors. It's not easy to move anywhere when you're homeless and when you don't have anything. So I want to talk about our response to this. And I say our because I believe our community is ready for this. But Dr. Brenda Chapman, who is my former supervisor and superintendent, and Shelley Muniz, who is a librarian at Columbia College, and I have been really brainstorming and working on this together. And they let me do the talking because I have the biggest mouth. So I'm going to tell you about our idea. It's known as Resiliency Village. And Angela Davis said that being a radical is just grabbing at the root of something. And this seems like a radical solution, but it's really not all that radical. It's just grabbing at the root of something. Because you can get people housing, but if we don't get at the root of the reason why they're homeless, we're just going to have the same problems. We're just going to move that problem maybe off the street, possibly safer. So we've looked at a lot of models. We've looked at a lot of places that are successful, and this is what we're developing. So Resiliency Village #1 goes with a housing first and low barrier housing approach. In other words, we don't care what condition you're in. Now you won't be able to use or drink or anything like that on the site, but you don't have to come sober. We want to give you the dignity of a home. And what's been shown over and over again is that if you house people and if you give them that low barrier, then they're more likely to get off drugs or to address whatever substance they're using. We have to maybe change our way of thinking about the use of substance. It's pain medication. And when you start to relieve the pain, when you give somebody the dignity of a home, when you give somebody the safety of a place to be, they can start addressing these other issues. We want to have trauma-centered holistic services on site, and that's what's really radical about this. No place that houses homeless people gives them this level of service. But if we're really going to reach them, especially the families, you know, I could tell you stories about families with as many as 5 and 6 kids showing up at my door at the resource center saying, we're moving back to the area and we have no place to stay. Fortunately, we have housing advocates like Jamie right here who eventually find them a place to stay, but it is not easy. We want to be able to have that family have a place to stay and start getting the services that they need, because every one of those families has a trauma history. One of the best ways to heal from trauma is not through talk therapies, because then you're just ripping open wounds and talking about it. That's why we have in here in these the healing center, performing arts, music, storytelling, gardening, working with animals, things that get people engaged in life again and building healthy relationships. We know that one of the most healthy external assets a child or anyone else can have is the belief that other people care about them, the connection to at least one other person. And that's the basis for this idea of dealing with our homeless population. Community partnerships means we have to have everybody working together on this. Bergen County, New Jersey has basically eliminated chronic homelessness by partnering with a homeless, or with a housing first solution, but by partnering with business, nonprofit, government, faith-based, and the homeless themselves to build a response to it. And they have ended chronic homelessness. After Hurricane Katrina, homelessness was a big deal in New Orleans. They have reduced homelessness by over 90% in New Orleans with a housing first approach, and then offering services to people. This is how you can get people off the street. This is how you can heal them. We're talking about peer mentoring, a coach approach. No one is going to be a better advocate and be better at getting you through what you come off the street from than someone who's been there already. So yes, we want to co-locate professionals. Yes, we want to partner with everybody who serves all of these different populations. But more than that, we want to empower and get people who've been through it to be able to help the next generation that comes behind them. And that way we build a really strong community. That way we have continued success. That way we have sustainability with this. We want to make sure that people are restored with the dignity of work. So we have work training. We have the idea of bike and auto repair, teaching them how to cook and do gardening, maybe run a food kitchen, maybe run a food truck, but make sure that people have something to do with themselves. Every one of those people that you met in that video would be happy to get a job tomorrow and work instead of be where they are. It's a myth that people are choosing not to work. That's a really tiny, tiny percentage of people who live outdoors, who live on the margins. People want to work. People want to feel like they belong and have something to exchange for their life, for the ability to stay someplace. That's what people want. They're no different than you and me. It's the same with kids at school. One of the things that drives me crazy is when I hear they say, oh, that child is not motivated, or that child could do better if they want to. Every child wants to. No child gets up in the morning and says, I can't wait to get to school and get in trouble. I can't wait to get called to the principal's office. That's not what they say when they get up in the morning. It's not what they think. They want to do as well as you, me, or anybody in this room. But what happens is they get up against a problem that's beyond their capability to deal with it, and they're compromised by the trauma that they've experienced. And their response is a response to the stress that they are under. And so they don't give us what we want. But that doesn't mean that they didn't want to do it. That doesn't mean they're not motivated. And it's the same with anybody who's living outdoors. So we want to do this idea of fostering post-traumatic growth and resilience. Many people in this room have been through trauma. but they're functioning and they're doing a good job and they're doing what they have to do. And so do a lot of people who go through trauma. But a lot of people don't quite have that resilience and they need someone else to help them. And then what they get to is post-traumatic growth. You're not stuck in the post-traumatic stress disorder. You actually use the things that happen to you as fuel for the future. You use that as a tool, as an idea that's gonna, I can get above this. And we see this, especially a lot of veterans are really good at this. They've been through incredible trauma, but they use their experience to keep them going and to motivate them to work and to go farther, and then maybe even to help people behind them. And last of all, of course, well, second to last, we want to make these services available to everyone. If we bind together, and that was another thing that they did in Bergen County to end this, is all the people who worked on this came together. So there's a central location, one possible place where you could get the service, no matter who you were, whether you were homeless or not, or on the verge of becoming homeless. And of course, we want to be transparent, which is why we're here talking to you about it. It's a ways to go before we get there, but it's incredible how fast it's been moving. And I think we're ready for it. Now, the last thing that I do, I have a personal tie to this. And I give the Project by Leon assessment. That's my brother. And he died last year in January. I'm sorry. I practiced this. I wasn't going to break up. But he was just like any other kid, happy. But he had mental health issues. And his mental health issues led to trauma. He wasn't traumatized particularly by his family, except the time when we tried to put him in an institution to help deal with it, and they put him in, bound him and stuff. But he went through a lot of trauma. And his pain medication of choice was alcohol. And he wound up dying at age 51, 3 days after I had lunch with him and took that picture of him right there. And what he said to me that day sticks with me for a long time. He said, "Mark, I'll never be alone. Pain is always with me." And he was in great pain that day. It was 3 days before his liver finally failed. And my assessment, my Leon assessment is, could Leon live there? Could we help Leon? Because Leon lived with me on and off, he lived with other members of our family. It's really hard to have someone with that level of dual diagnosis and that level of pain live with you. He would be fine as long as I didn't go to work or do anything else and was there for him all the time. That's what we need in Resiliency Village. A place where you're always amongst people who can help you. That's how we get people like Leon. If Leon could thrive there, then it can happen. That's why I call it my Leon assessment. And that's what I believe about Community Village. Leon could have lived there. Leon could still be with us if Resiliency Village had been there for him. So the woman who is behind reducing homelessness in New Orleans by 90%, this is a great quote. We have to provide housing for people with disabilities. We have to have housing for the elderly. We have to make sure that children aren't homeless. That's part of being a healthy community and a country that has a moral core. And I think our community is pretty healthy, and I think our community has a moral core. And I think this is an issue of justice, and that every single person who lives out there deserves the justice that we could give them. So I'd like to end with one last quote. Martin Luther King used a version of this, but I like to go with the original from Theodore White, who was a Unitarian minister and fought against slavery in the 1850s. And he said, "I do not understand the moral universe. The arc of it is long, and my eye sees but a little ways. I cannot calculate the curve or complete the figure through the experience of sight. I can divine it through conscience, and I am sure that it bends toward justice." Let's have justice for everyone in our community. Thank you.